Ladies and gentlemen, what if the holiest place on earth isn't a distant temple or a sacred mountain, but the space you occupy right now? What if the miracle you're waiting for isn't somewhere out there but already breathing quietly within you? Just imagine that the very presence of the divine has chosen to dwell not above you, not beside you, but inside you. How differently would you speak, move, forgive, love, if you truly believed that every step you took was accompanied by glory hidden in flesh? There is a persistent misunderstanding, quietly assumed by many and rarely challenged, that the presence of the divine within us must always be accompanied by a certain feeling. We expect, perhaps unconsciously, that if such a holy truth were real, if God were indeed dwelling within, then surely we would sense it. We imagine warmth, clarity, emotional uplift, perhaps even a sense of ecstasy or triumph. And when those feelings do not come, or worse, when what comes is boredom, confusion, or silence, we assume something must be broken. Either we are not worthy of such a presence, or perhaps the presence itself is not there at all. But feelings are fleeting things. They shift like the weather and are influenced by hunger, sleep, memory, or the sound of someone else's voice. They cannot be trusted to measure eternal things. A truth that is only real when we feel it is no truth at all. The presence of God within is not a sensation to be summoned, but a reality to be trusted. It is not diminished by your distraction or absence of emotion. It is not increased by your sudden inspiration or a well-played hymn. It simply is. To act as if God is within you, then, does not mean waiting until you feel holy or strong or joyful. It means living in accordance with something truer than your current emotional state. A soldier does not wait until he feels brave to obey the order. A musician does not wait until inspiration strikes before practicing her scales. And in the same way, the soul that believes or even suspects that God has taken up residence within does not wait for spiritual fireworks before moving forward. It walks in trust. This is not a denial of emotion. Far from it. There are times when joy floods the soul, when peace settles like a quiet snowfall, and the awareness of God's nearness becomes almost tangible. These are gifts, but they are not the foundation. They are not the proof. If you live by them, you will fall when they disappear, and they always do for a time. The dark night of the soul is not a punishment. It is often a test of whether you will believe when belief no longer carries a thrill. Imagine a child learning to walk. There comes a point when the parent must step back, not to abandon the child, but to allow the child to try, to wobble, to fall, to discover that balance must come from within. If the parent held the child every moment, the child would never grow. So too, we are allowed times of quiet and dryness, so that we may learn to act not from feeling but from trust. And trust, unlike emotion, is a muscle. It is strengthened by use. When you speak kindly to the person who has wronged you, not because you feel gracious, but because you believe God is within you, that is trust. When you resist the temptation to lie, not because you feel strong, but because you carry holiness in your breath, that is trust. When you offer love to someone who has nothing to give you in return, not because you feel generous, but because you remember who is dwelling in your heart, that is trust. And it is this kind of living that begins to shape you. Not merely outwardly, but inwardly. Your choices slowly mold the soul they rise from. To act as if God is within you is to step into the truth before the feeling arrives. It is to obey before you understand, to walk before you see the road clearly. It is the decision to live in a way that reflects not your mood, but your identity. This kind of life is not easy. It is not always thrilling, but it is deeply, quietly transformative, because in time the actions you take in trust become habits, and the habits become character. And the character becomes a vessel more capable of truly recognizing the very presence you once could not feel. And so the truth remains, God within is not proved by a feeling. It is known in the decision to live differently. Not because you feel holy, but because He is holy and He is near, whether you sense Him or not. There is a quiet danger that creeps in whenever we begin to speak of holiness dwelling within us. A danger not of corruption, but of confusion, of subtly shifting the source of the light to the lamp itself. It is tempting to believe, once we have glimpsed goodness, that it originated in us. We begin to think of ourselves as the well, rather than the cup. We confuse being filled with being the filler. But to act as if God is within you is not to declare independence, but to accept dependence. It is not to boast of your strength, but to confess your weakness and your willingness to carry something far greater than yourself. The moon is beautiful in the night sky, casting silver across water and shadow alike, but it gives no light of its own. Its glory is the reflection of another. The same is true of a soul in whom God dwells. The beauty, the wisdom, the courage that might shine through such a person are not generated by them, they are reflected. They are passed through. They are evidence of presence, not proof of origin. And in that there is great humility. The one who knows God is within does not strut. He bows. She walks quietly, aware that the light she bears is not hers to possess, but to share. To live as if God is within is to remember that you are a vessel, a bearer of something sacred, not the author of it. You may be strong, but your strength is borrowed. You may be wise, but your wisdom is received. And the moment you forget that, truly forget, it begins to slip through your fingers. The vessel cannot fill itself. The lamp cannot ignite on its own. When you begin to act as though you are the source, you lose the very thing you are trying to protect. But this truth is not meant to shame or diminish you. In fact, it is the opposite. For while you are not the source, you are still chosen to carry it. The infinite chooses the finite as its dwelling place. The eternal chooses to be seen through the temporary. There is a kind of sacred dignity in that. You are not nothing. You are not disposable. You are not an accident. You are made to carry this treasure, and your very limits are what make the presence within so remarkable. That God would dwell not in palaces or perfect creatures, but in you, in your weakness, in your ordinariness, is a mystery too great to fully grasp. And yet here it is. The flame lives in fragile vessels. The kingdom moves through human hands. The divine speaks in trembling voices. This is not a flaw in the design. It is the design. For the moment we recognize that we are only vessels, we become available. We stop striving to prove our worth and start offering what we carry. We stop fearing failure and start trusting that the work is not ours to complete alone. We stop measuring our value by our performance and start remembering the one who fills us. There is no room for pride in this posture, but there is no room for despair either. You are not expected to be the source. You are not required to produce the light. You are simply asked to remain open, to be available, clean and willing, to let what is in you flow out, to stay connected to the source even when you feel empty, especially then, because a vessel does not prove its worth by how full it feels, but by its readiness to be filled again. This way of living changes how you approach your strengths and weaknesses alike. When you succeed, you offer it back. When you fail, you lean in closer. You do not collapse under the weight of your limitations, nor do you inflate with the illusion of control. You live in a quiet awareness that you are participating in something far beyond your capacity to create. You are part of a movement that does not begin or end with you, and yet you matter immensely within it. To act as if God is within you is not to behave with arrogance, but with reverence, not with self-importance, but with a deep, abiding sense of calling. It is to move through your day not as a god, but as one chosen to carry God's light into places where it has not yet been seen. And in that you are not made smaller. You are made whole. There is a subtle shift in the way a person moves through the world when they begin to act as if God is within them. It is not a matter of outward display or visible glory, but of inward awareness and internal reordering of how one sees each moment, each action, each breath. When one believes, or even begins to consider, that the divine dwells within, the ordinary is no longer merely ordinary. It becomes charged with responsibility. Every word spoken is no longer just a sound, it becomes a reflection. Every choice, even the quiet and hidden ones, begins to matter. One realizes that nothing is truly private anymore, not because of surveillance or guilt, but because something holy is present, even in solitude. The awareness that you are always being watched by eternity does not begin in fear. It does not come with the eyes of a tyrant measuring every misstep. Rather, it is the gaze of one who loves so deeply that nothing escapes attention. When a child performs a simple act of kindness and believes no one sees, but a parent in the next room quietly smiles, that is closer to the truth. You are seen, not as a figure in a courtroom, but as a beloved in the presence of one who sees everything and misses nothing. And if that is true, then how differently we might live. To act as if God is within you is to carry this awareness into every moment. It is to understand that you are never alone in your decisions, that your hands do not move in isolation. When you speak with gentleness to a stranger, when you withhold a harsh word that could wound, when you pause to listen instead of rushing to speak, these small things, often unnoticed by others, are observed in eternity. They ripple outward, not just into the lives of those around you, but into the shape of your own soul. And when you stumble because you will, you are still seen. But you are not dismissed. The gaze of eternity is not one of scorn, but of longing for your return, for your restoration. The awareness that you are always being watched by the one within is not meant to lead to anxiety, but to alignment. You begin to live as one who carries something fragile and precious, something that must be honored. Not out of obligation, but out of reverence. And with that reverence comes dignity. You are no longer driven by what others think, because you know who truly sees. And you are no longer careless with your choices, because each one echoes far beyond what you can measure. It changes how you view even the smallest parts of your day. The way you rise in the morning, how you speak to the one who interrupts you, how you respond when no one is watching, these become sacred. You begin to treat your time differently, because it is no longer just your own. You begin to treat others differently, because you see them not just with your eyes, but with the eyes of the one who lives within you. Even how you view your body changes, not as an object to control or judge, but as a temple, a vessel, a place where heaven has chosen to dwell. This constant awareness of being watched by eternity is not a burden but a grace. It lifts the dullness from routine and infuses it with meaning. It interrupts selfish impulses and replaces them with the quiet voice of purpose. You are not trying to impress. You are not performing. You are simply remembering. And in that remembering you begin to change. You do not need applause. You do not need credit. You begin to care less about results and more about faithfulness. Because you know that even when no one else sees, God sees. Even when no one else remembers, He remembers. And so you continue day by day, choice by choice, learning to live in a way that reflects the presence within. You begin to understand that your life is not a stage but an altar. Not a competition but a calling. Not a monologue but a conversation. You act as if God is within you, not because you always feel it, and not because you always succeed at it, but because something deep in you knows it to be true. You were made to live seen. To act as if God is within you is not merely a matter of willpower or moral rigidity. It is not the cold recitation of rules, nor is it the sterile execution of religious duty. Rather, it requires the imagination to see the invisible, to walk as though the presence of the eternal is pulsing through every mundane moment. It demands a shift not just in behavior, but in vision, a sanctified imagination that interprets the ordinary with divine possibility. Without imagination, obedience becomes a hollow performance. But when you begin to imagine what it truly means to carry the divine, you start to live differently, not out of obligation but out of awareness. Picture yourself walking into a room. If you truly believed that God Himself had taken up residence within you, how would your posture change? Would your words be different? Would you carry yourself with more gentleness, more restraint, more clarity of purpose? The imagination doesn't just invent fantasy, it gives shape to reality too large to be seen with the naked eye. It allows you to step into the identity you've been given, even when you cannot yet see all its implications. Imagination in this sacred sense is not about escape from reality but deeper engagement with it. There is a kind of holy playfulness involved in this. Not frivolity, but wonder. The kind that asks, what would it look like to forgive as if God Himself is the source of my mercy? What would it look like to speak encouragement, not just as kindness, but as prophecy? You begin to imagine possibilities that are foreign to the world's expectations but native to the kingdom's order. You see yourself not merely as a person responding to circumstances, but as a vessel shaping them by the presence you carry. Your hands become instruments, not merely for productivity but for blessing. Your eyes become windows through which others might glimpse grace. And even silence becomes active, a pause filled with reverence, a space cleared for the sacred to speak. This kind of living is not taught in a single lesson. It is cultivated over time, like learning to see in the dark. The imagination must be exercised, stretched, refined. There will be days when it feels foolish, when you are tempted to return to living by sight alone. The world will offer its scripts: react this way, speak like this, win at any cost, dominate or disappear. But the imagination trained by divine presence begins to reject these scripts as too small. It chooses a higher path, not always louder, not always praised, but truer. The imagination that believes God is within does not settle for what is, but longs for what could be when grace is allowed to move freely. The obedience is still necessary, of course, but without imagination, obedience hardens into compliance. It becomes a checklist instead of a calling. Imagination breathes life into obedience by asking not only what must I do, but also what am I becoming? And who is being revealed through me? That shift is crucial. You are not merely trying to avoid failure. You are attempting to participate in a greater story. Each decision becomes a brushstroke in a masterpiece not yet finished, a line in a song you've only begun to hear. And here again, imagination offers help. It allows you to see beyond your own limitations. You may feel unqualified, too broken, too uncertain. But the imagination sanctified by divine presence remembers that the story has always been written through unlikely characters. You do not have to be great, you only have to be willing. The presence within you is not limited by your past or by your weakness. It works through them. And imagination dares to believe that even now, even here, something eternal can be born in your response to an interruption, a disappointment, a stranger's need. To act as if God is within you is not a command meant to suppress joy, but to unlock it. It is an invitation to live creatively, to shape the world around you with something more beautiful than fear or pride or habit. And imagination is the key. It allows you to envision what holiness looks like in a conversation, what love sounds like in conflict, what humility feels like in success. And the more you imagine, the more you will begin to see, not just what could be, but what already is, quietly, invisibly, faithfully within you. And that changes everything. To sin is often understood as the breaking of a rule, the violation of a code, a deviation from a fixed and moral path. But that understanding, while not entirely wrong, is far too small. It presents sin as a legal matter, something to be measured, weighed, judged and punished. And while there is truth in the idea that sin is rebellion or disobedience, there is a deeper truth that slips quietly beneath the surface, one that reveals something more intimate, more personal, and more painful. Sin, at its heart, is not merely a crime. It is a forgetting. When you begin to live as if God is within you, the idea of sin takes on an entirely different texture. It is no longer only about external actions, it becomes about internal awareness. The failure is not just in what you did, but in who you forgot you were. You forgot that you were carrying the sacred. You forgot that the words you spoke were meant to echo eternity. You forgot that your thoughts were not yours to pollute, but a dwelling place of holiness. Sin becomes a kind of spiritual amnesia, a lapse not just in morality but in memory. This forgetting is not always loud or dramatic. Often it is quiet, gradual, and unnoticed. You begin your day aware, perhaps even prayerful, and somewhere between the interruptions and the irritations, the awareness fades. You react with sharpness or selfishness or pride, not because you have decided to be evil, but because you have ceased to remember. You slip into pettiness, or deception, or bitterness, not as a declaration of defiance, but because you've allowed yourself to live as if you were empty, as if there were nothing within you that could restrain, inspire, or redeem. You live as if you are alone again. And this forgetting wounds more than just the one who forgets. It affects those around you. When you forget that God is within you, you begin to treat others as if He is not within them either. You speak without compassion. You act without patience. You judge without grace. Because when the divine presence is no longer remembered, the world becomes smaller, colder, more mechanical. People become problems, not mysteries. Moments become burdens, not invitations. And slowly the soul begins to shrink. But there is hope even in the midst of this forgetting, because the presence within you does not vanish with your memory of it. God is not so fragile as to leave simply because you fail to recall Him. He waits. He remains. He calls, not with condemnation but with longing. He invites you back to remembrance. And often, the very pain of your misstep becomes the thread that pulls you home. The ache in your conscience is not just guilt, it is memory returning. It is the reawakening of your deeper self, the one who knows that there is more than this. When you begin to recognize sin as forgetfulness, it changes how you approach repentance. You are not crawling back to beg for acceptance from a distant judge. You are shaking off sleep. You are remembering what is true again. Repentance becomes restoration of clarity. You lift your eyes. You recall who lives within. And the change is not merely in behavior, but in posture. You stand differently. You speak differently. Because you are recentered in your identity, not as a performer seeking approval, but as a vessel carrying glory. This understanding also breeds humility. You stop seeing others as worse sinners or lesser saints. You begin to realize that they too forget, that behind the outburst or the cruelty or the silence, there is likely a soul that has lost its memory. You begin to respond not with condemnation but with invitation. You call them, not just to goodness but to remembrance. You do not excuse sin, but you recognize its root, and you speak not as a superior, but as a fellow traveler, a fellow forgetter who is learning again what it means to carry God. And in this, sin becomes not a place of shame, but a place of awakening. Not because it is good, but because God is good enough to use it to call you home. You begin to live not in fear of failing, but in hope of remembering. You do not obsess over perfection, but you anchor yourself in presence. You hold on to the truth that you are never beyond return, never too far to recall what has always been quietly true, that even when you forget Him, He has not forgotten you. And in remembering that, you begin to live again. There are moments in life when silence descends with a weight so heavy it feels like absence. You pray and there is no answer. You seek and find no door. You sit with your grief or confusion or longing, and the stillness does not yield. It is in these moments that doubt comes not only as a thought but as a presence. Perhaps I am alone. Perhaps there is no one listening. Perhaps this inner fire has gone out. But to act as if God is within you, especially in the absence of feeling, is one of the truest acts of faith. It is a decision not based on sensation but on trust, not driven by emotion but by remembrance. There is a kind of faith that blooms in sunlight when the presence is near, when the answers are clear, when the path seems lit and obvious. And this faith is good. It is the faith of celebration, the faith that sings when all is well. But there is another faith, quieter, slower, forged in the shadows. It is the faith that remains when the warmth is gone, when the sky is closed, when the soul feels hollow. This faith walks forward without sight. It remembers the truth it once felt and decides to live by it, even when every part of the body and mind cries out for proof. It is the faith of the night. To act as if God is within you when you no longer feel Him, there is not hypocrisy, it is devotion. It is loyalty to reality over perception. The absence of sensation is not the absence of presence. The wind does not cease to exist when the trees stand still. The fire does not die when the heat is less intense. In fact, the coals burn deepest long after the flames have subsided. And so it is with the soul. The absence of feeling may simply be a deepening of intimacy, a stripping away of dependency on the emotional to make way for the eternal. Feelings are fleeting. They shift with sleep, with hunger, with circumstance. One day you feel full of faith, the next you feel hollow and lost. This is the normal rhythm of the human experience. And yet, the indwelling of God is not subject to that rhythm. He does not depart because you are discouraged. He does not abandon because you cannot summon emotion. If He lives within you, He remains even in silence, especially in silence. The silence is not punishment, it is an invitation. To go deeper, to walk further, to trust more. The saints and sages of old knew this silence well. They called it the dark night of the soul, not because God was gone, but because the soul could no longer feel Him. And yet they walked on. They prayed when the words felt empty. They obeyed when the reward seemed distant. They loved when love was not returned. They did so not because they were strong, but because they believed. They had tasted something true, and even when their senses betrayed them, they lived by what they knew, not by what they felt. This kind of living is a form of courage. It is the courage to build a life, not on the sand of changing moods, but on the rock of unchanging truth. It is the courage to kneel in prayer when your heart is dry, to serve when you are weary, to forgive when you are wounded. It is a quiet rebellion against the lie that God must be felt to be near. And in this rebellion, something astonishing begins to happen. You are changed. The soul deepens. The roots of your faith grow thick and quiet. You are no longer tossed about by the tempest of emotion. You become still, grounded, strong. Acting as if God is within you when you feel nothing is not pretending. It is choosing. It is faith made flesh. It is the decision to live by light, even when the room is dark. This choice does not produce fireworks or applause, but it builds a soul that can endure. It carves out a space inside you that holds even when the winds rage. And often when you least expect it, the silence begins to hum, not loudly but steadily. A quiet awareness returns not always as a feeling, but as a knowing. A gentle assurance that even in the silence, even in the doubt, even in the shadow, you have never been alone. He was always there. If one were to gather all these truths into a single breath, it would not be a declaration of grandeur, but a quiet, steady resolve. Live as if God is within you. Not because it is always easy, not because you always feel it, but because it is true. To carry the divine is not to be immune from weakness, but to be transformed by presence. It is to walk through this world not as one abandoned, but as one inhabited, chosen, watched, remembered. It means you speak with grace when others fall silent, extend mercy when justice demands distance, and forgive not because it is deserved, but because you know what it is to be forgiven. You act not from impulse, but from identity. You move through the dark with a light that doesn't flicker with circumstance. You remember who you are when the world forgets. And in your remembering, you become a witness not of yourself, but of the one who lives within. And if even one person sees that light in you and remembers the light within themselves, then you have done more than speak truth, you have lived it.